Grace Kelly, the Academy Award-winning actress, the heart of Hollywood, and the dream of every man, has become a princess of Monaco. Now she will live out her days happily ever after with her charming prince, in peace and happiness. And people will look at her life as a fairy tale, and dream of landing in her shoes for even a day. But in Grace's own words, the notion of her life being a fairy tale is itself a fairy tale. In the opening scene, Alfred Hitchcock arrives at the prince's palace. He is led by a young woman and informed about the formalities of meeting the princess. However, all the formalities are forgotten when Alfred and Grace sit down together in private. Grace is presented with an enormous possibility. Hitchcock offers her the role of a lifetime, and the studio is willing to pay her $1 million. Grace doesn't say it upfront, but it is obvious that her answer is no. Acting has become something very distant for her. It is a shame, though, as Alfred puts it, she is still an actress, and she must not forget that. Out of politeness, but with an underlying irony, Alfred asks where Prince Rainier is, and we learn that the royal marriage isn't affectionate at all. The prince is mostly working. In the end, Hitchcock is asked to stay for a night, but he has some business to attend to, so with an obvious irony, he nods to Grace, calls her Highness, and walks away. Everything around her is whispering the opposite, but Grace still repeats to herself, and to Alfred, that her life cannot get any better than this. Later that night, both the prince and the princess are on Arianassis's boat party. Rainier is involved in a political dialogue with the French treasury agent. They are talking about the Algerian-French War when Grace walks in and sits beside Rainier. Soon, she voluntarily gets involved in the argument with the French, exposing the hideousness of European colonialism. She wins. After a short back and forth, it is extremely evident that all her opponent can do is say that the princess should not trouble herself with such matters. After the party, Rainier is furious with her. It was the chief treasurer of de Gaulle, the president of France, she debated against. Everything Grace says has consequences. Who couldn't she just stay quiet, in those kinds of circumstances? Rainier needs this man by his side to modernize this country, so Grace must forget about her American attitude. His words are outrageous and frustrating to Grace. Her ability to always speak her mind and stay true to herself was the thing that Rainier initially liked about her. The political life of a princess is extremely confusing for her. Finally, Rainier reveals that he knows about Hitchcock's visit. It is a shame he wasn't informed. He would have liked to see him. The next morning, we understand what Monaco's politics really look like. Grace is walking in an abandoned hospital, suggesting the plan of renovating it and turning it into a working establishment. But her countess says that they simply do not have enough funds for it. At the end of the scene, however, she mentions the Red Cross ball that needs organizing. It is obvious that Monaco's treasury is almost empty, and the Prince Rainier prefers to spend whatever he has to ensure Monaco's good image, rather than to improve what really needs improving. Grace is infuriated. In the next scene, Rainier addresses the same problem at a meeting attended by another French representative. Here, we understand that French politics is one of the main reasons for Monaco's infantile economy. De Gaulle, however, considers himself gracious. Most of the businesses operating in Monaco are French. And so, the French representative demands Monaco pay taxes to France. This is outrageous. Monaco is a sovereign country, and Rainier says so. Soon the meeting becomes hostile. It even goes so far that, in the end, the representative insults Grace and Rainier's children, calling them the offspring of a Philadelphia bricklayer. This is an infuriating insult. Rainier slaps the man and expels him from Monaco. He will not let anyone humiliate his country or his family. Back at Grace, she visits her friend and principality priest, Tuck, and shares all that troubles her openly. She feels her decision might have been a mistake. Everything she says or does is wrong here. Nothing feels natural to her anymore. In the next scene, while in a car with him, she gets a reality check. Grace still lets herself dream about getting back to acting. The role that Hitchcock offered her is that of a compulsive, frigid thief, but it is a great role. There is no chance of it happening, though. Rainier would never permit it. That afternoon, Rainier learns about the consequences of his recent outrage. France has put forth an ultimatum. Either Monaco pays taxes to France, or the shortest war in the history of mankind will take place. The prince tells Grace, while quickly eating his dinner, that he will apologize to de Gaulle. The political discussion, however, quickly fades away. First, Grace puts forward the subject of the hospital renovation. Rainier only asks her not to praise the treasurer too much, since her husband is an important and rich friend of theirs. This is another instance when Grace is made to suppress herself. Suddenly, she gets an urge to run away from it all, and realizes that she has enough material to try it. Hitchcock offered her a role, and fortunately, when Rainier hears about it, his answer is quite surprising. He says that she can do it if she must, but asks her to manage her publicity. And so, with renewed motivation, Grace starts working on her role. The next morning, she and her publicist convince the ministers and the press officers that nothing devastating can come of it, but the politicians of Monaco are clearly against it. Until the crisis is over, however, the movie will remain under wraps. Everything seems great. Even Grace's children seem to catch a liking for cinema, but later that day, while visiting an orphanage, Grace receives a very surprising question. A journalist from Look magazine asks her if she's going back to Hollywood. They received a copy of her press release from the studio this morning. Angry and afraid, Grace doesn't know whether to run or fight. In the end, she just answers that she's not going back. Then, from Hitchcock, she learns that the press release came from the palace. The studio only published a response. But it doesn't matter now. Grace will need some more time to think. The news has already spread, and everything will be far trickier now. As Tuck tells her in the next scene, most importantly, Rainier must not be troubled about this. If he learns that the news got leaked, he will think that there's a French spy in the palace, and the way he negotiates with de Gaulle will alter significantly. It is the biggest danger. However, just as he says this, Rainier walks in and gets interested. Just what is it that he mustn't know? And again, his response is surprisingly calm. He is merely disappointed. Soon, while recording the party with her friends, including Phyllis, her most trusted companion and secretary, she learns about what the people from Monaco think about her recent actions. It is nothing but hostility. Rainier's sister, Antoinette, however, assures her to concentrate on real problems, such as her children. Everybody's having a good time at the party, but one person is missing. Madge, Grace's lady-in-waiting. She's one of the main suspects in the information leakage. Ari's wife, Maria, comes to Grace, and together they leave the party. They are much alike. Maria is also an artist who cannot hide and be left alone. It is the biggest curse an artist can have. Together, they ride, and this small emotional vacation reassures Grace not to give up. Meanwhile, Rainier is on the phone with the president of France, and hears as the latter uses Grace's news to his advantage. His ultimatum still stands. Rainier protests that paying taxes to France will mean losing sovereignty, but de Gaulle doesn't care about that. He was humiliated publicly, and Monaco will pay for it. He demands the answer by the end of the day. Ari Onassis comes up with an idea after the phone call. His advice is both clever and immoral. He says that Rainier can use his American wife to his advantage. He can call President Kennedy and start putting pressure on de Gaulle. He also has some European neighbors. And so, the matter might become global. The other politicians seem to share Ari's enthusiasm too. Rainier is Grace's husband. He must put his foot down. In the next scene, we see him doing it. Perhaps in order to seem powerful, Rainier decides to forbid Grace from going back to Hollywood while having dinner with many other people. He orders her to officially and publicly turn down Hitchcock. But Grace isn't a woman who will take such humiliation in front of her friends. And so, a huge disagreement breaks out between them. And all the bitterness that they are holding inside erupts out of their mouths. In the end, the prince just storms out. That evening, Grace watches a rerun of her marriage. Tuck is with him. This man is the only figure to whom she can open up entirely. Grace wants to get divorced. Everything inside her demands escape. This isn't what she expected, not being herself. And here, Tuck tells her something that Grace has never thought about. Grace Kelly, the actress, wasn't her real self either. It was a role she mastered and enjoyed the most. And in this light, Princess Grace Kelly is her biggest and most dangerous role, which she willingly accepted. And her children need her to keep playing it. She calls her mother then, seeking relief. Grace hopes to have a real, normal conversation with her, as it seems like the Princess of Monaco can no longer have an ordinary, carefree conversation, even with her mother. But it is all right. Grace decides to study her role thoroughly, just like she would do in Hollywood, and meets with Count Fernando de Liers, the expert in Monaco's history and protocol. Meanwhile, France has started the blockade. Within 2 months, starvation is going to begin. And this is when France will most likely invade. Whatever Rainier has up his sleeve, he will have to pull it up quickly. Later that day, Rainier and Tuck have a small conversation in the palace, and we understand that the prince is feeling guilty. He wants to talk with Grace, but he's never been good at such things. He doesn't know how to talk to her. We also learn that it was Tuck's idea to marry the two. Perhaps this is why the priest is the most impelled to sort things out between the two. The time flies, and Grace gradually gets assimilated into the Monégasque culture. And once she learns its history from the Count, the latter introduces her to her new French teacher and her new movement teacher. Grace will master the art of being a princess. And so a more intense educational process begins, as Rainier starts preparing to host a state reception for his European neighbors. In the next scene, Tuck and Ferdinand are walking together when the priest says that he will be leaving. It is an extremely tough decision for him to make, especially in such critical times. He's been serving as a father figure for both the princess and the prince. Soon, they will be on their own. Grace is as pressured as ever, but she learns to control her appearance and summon emotions on her face in an instant. She learns how to dance and how to speak with full confidence. She strolls the streets of Monaco, and it looks like the citizens of this small country are starting to respect their princess. One night, Rainier gazes at Grace sleeping. It is a shame that this is the only time he can be close to her. While awake, Grace is almost dangerous to him. He walks away then, and an uninvited person quietly walks in after him. It is Madge. She sneakily investigates Grace's stuff and discovers that she's one of her main suspects. Immediately, she calls France and informs her superiors that she's in trouble. It turns out that Madge is behind all of this, but Phyllis listens to her. So soon, it will all explode. The next morning, Grace makes her first serious political statement. She walks up to the French soldiers on the border and brings them some food and peace. It is a clever thing to do. She is bringing the power of the media to her side. That night, Madge helps a French private detective cross the west border of Monaco and arranges a secret meeting with him over the phone. But Phyllis, along with Grace, should listen to this call. Now even Grace knows about Madge, and she gives out her first order: do whatever needs to be done with Madge. In the middle of the night, somewhere in the forest, the two conspirators meet up and exchange some envelopes, and when the detective leaves, Madge opens them up anxiously to see what's inside. But just before she does it, her passenger door opens loudly. Now she will answer for her crimes. Meanwhile, Grace seeks Tuck's advice and visits him at night. She finds him sleeping on his bed with his clothes on. Suddenly, Grace notices a letter lying on his bedside and starts reading it. And as if an alarm is activated in Tuck's brain, he wakes up and tells her not to meddle in his private letters. And so, there's no point in hiding it anymore. Tuck tells her that he's leaving. He's going home, back to America. Grace is just like a bridge that's been stripped of its piers. Especially in the middle of this chaos, she needs Tuck's wisdom and his support. But as it seems, Grace will have to become an ideal for her family all by herself. She must fight this brute force somehow, and protect her family alone. She explodes in tears. The Princess of Monaco is afraid. Time flies again. In the middle of September, the European Summit is held. Just before the opening, Rainier and Grace meet each other in private. They haven't seen each other for a long time. They can only manage to greet each other formally, and blame the distance between them on merely being busy. But there's love in their eyes, and shining like a true fairytale couple, they enter the summit. Grace knows that Rainier needs her by his side. There's clearly more than one spy in their palace. And so, in front of the leaders from all around Europe, Prince Rainier makes his straightforward and bold speech. But something unexpected happens. The news reports that there was attack on de Gaulle, and that the entire summit failed. Every guest of honor walks away. Nobody is willing to oppose France in order to defend a small and powerless state like Monaco. The chaos breaks in the castle. Trembling in frustration, Grace finds Rainier and tries to put a seed of hope in his heart. Nobody was ever able to take Monaco, and de Gaulle won't be an exception. She walks away then, and sees Lady Antoinette talking happily with some executives. It is a seemingly ordinary scene, but suddenly, Grace realizes something extremely dreadful. It is a moment of unusual insight. And even Antoine understands that she's being suspected. Grace runs away. This new information is simply too much to comprehend. She sprints into her room and tries to catch her breath, when Madge and Phyllis walk in with an envelope. This is the exact envelope that Madge got from the French private detective. Inside are photos of Antoinette with de Gaulle's people. So Madge is innocent. She merely investigated the real traitor, Rainier's sister. The prince starts looking for Grace and walks inside the room loudly. Seeing these grieving faces, he demands an explanation and calls everybody off after hearing the dreadful news. Once only he and Grace are left, the prince looks out of the window and asks her the most honest question: why is she still there? How could somebody digest all this madness and not run away? Grace doesn't need to think about the answer, especially now, looking at Rainier being lost and desperate and seeing her family in. She has no more doubts. She is here to protect her children, and she hasn't left because she still loves him. It is true that Rainier is lost. Perhaps he will even lose the crown, but so what? They will still have each other. They will start all over again, build a farm, and live out their days in peace, watching each other grow old and wrinkly. Rainier says that he never wanted all this for Grace. He really wanted to give her the fairytale life. It is a moment of sadness and love, and it is obvious that up until now, they've never been this close. The next morning, she calls Alfred Hitchcock and tells him about her decision. Alfred will have to find somebody else for the role. The director is naturally struck by this news, but Grace's well-being troubles him most. So he urges her not to forget about cinema completely. Rainier wakes up, and Grace asks him for permission to do something. She has an idea. In the next scene, she meets with the Red Cross people and, together with them, plans to host the annual Red Cross International Ball anyway. It is true that a raging war is looming over their heads, but no one can turn their backs on the Red Cross and its values. The invitations spread across Europe. Grace wants all the powerful people in the world in Monaco, and to avoid war and express her kind intentions fully, she goes to Paris and brings the invitations herself. She even makes an official announcement there, saying that she won't be returning to Hollywood. De Gaulle immediately understands what she's trying to do. Europe has turned its back on Rainier, but they won't do the same to Grace. For the first time, the princess is showing her power. Once she gets back to Monaco, she wakes up Lady Antoinette and her husband Jean-Charles, the traitors to the state, and exposes them both. For a moment, the two seem to have hopes of surviving this, but the tension rises as Rainier walks inside and closes the door behind him. The prince just stands there, getting himself involved only when it's necessary. Antoinette is afraid, but she chooses to fight with aggression. It won't cut it in this instance, though. Grace has all the cards in her hands. She informs the accused that they are forever banished from Monaco, but before that, they must perform one final act of state if they want their child to be taken care of. This is a cruel but necessary move to make. That morning, they force Jean-Charles to call de Gaulle and advise him to come to Monaco for the Red Cross ball. He tells the president that they have Rainier where they want him. The poor prince is ready to agree to anything, including handing over the crown. Once the call is over, de Gaulle's advisors seem a little doubtful, but the president gloats in arrogance. He won't be afraid of a little American actress. He accepts the invitation. On the 9th of October, the night of the grand event, de Gaulle gets out of his car and is met with jeering, while the American defense minister is embraced with applause from the crowd. But nothing compares with the reaction that explodes when the prince and the princess arrive. With their glowing appearance, they give shade to everyone else. Until he ascends the stairs and meets with de Gaulle and the American general, Rainier stops and watches Grace as she performs her act exceptionally. She walks around the crowd and meets people. Everyone loves her. When all the greetings, including those with the traitor family, are in order, the ball begins. De Gaulle sees Grace and says hello to Antoinette and Jean-Charles, and for now, we can only hope that he's unable to sense anything out of the ordinary between them. And then, not long after, the time comes for Grace to make her speech. This is it, all will be decided now. This is the moment when she must be strong. Stuttering or taking a step back is no longer an option. And so, after a long silence, she starts out by thanking all the guests for honoring their little country, and then she tells the following story. Her father told her to always pray that, should she make it one day, she would never be ungrateful. Should she acquire a position of authority and power, she would always use it for good. Then a man came along in her life, a prince, that made her see the world with enough compassion that the prayer in her heart got reignited. And that is why today, she chose to honor the Red Cross. The movement that doesn't choose between powerful and ordinary, that cares for everyone separately and equally. But there will always be people who will oppose that, and who will think that their ability to destroy beauty allows them to do so. Take Monaco, a little place in which everyone tries to do what's right, in their own way. There's a great deal of beauty and purity in Monaco, and they can do very little to oppose evil. In some sense, Grace is just like Monaco. She has very little means to fight the power that seeks to destroy her, and she even prefers to sit under falling bombs to live in a world where love doesn't conquer all. Because Grace believes in love, she believes in fairy tales, and she knows that it's love that will make them put away their guns and politics, and defend what's truly meaningful. The hall has been silent for a long time. Rainier is looking at his princess with immeasurable love, while the entire hall is trying to digest her words. In the end, it's the prince who claps first, and all the other guests follow his lead immediately. De Gaulle stands up, smiling ironically, but his carelessness is flushed down when the American defense minister turns to him and asks him cynically if he's really planning to throw a bomb down on their princess. The meaning behind his words is obvious. If France chooses to invade anyway, America will protect Monaco. And as Grace takes her seat, Rainier leans towards her and whispers that he loves her. His words have never been more truthful. And so, in fighting something much greater than herself, in defeating brute force with love, Grace Kelly forever immortalized her name. In playing the roles of devoted mother, loyal wife, and compassionate leader, she became an example for generations to come. Her name will live on, the sacrifices she made will be compensated, and her serenity will be forever looked up to. This is how the fairy tale of Grace Kelly ends.